Hello and welcome to Criminal Justice in a Nutshell. This is John Fisher, and today we're going to be talking about Chapter 3 from your Alarid textbook, Community-Based Corrections. Today's chapter is History of Parole and Mandatory Release. There are two types of post-prison release programs that we find today. The first is mandatory release, which is a conditional release from prison under a determinate sentencing. Okay, once you've received good time or you have good time and you have achieved whatever requirements that the state has put forth for you, once you have reached your minimum sentence required, you're released on mandatory release, you're released on discretionary parole, or you're not discretionary, but you are on mandatory supervision with the patrol system with an automatic release at the expiration of your minimum term of incarceration. The second form or type of post-prison release is discretionary parole or discretionary release. This is a conditional release, and it becomes, or for members of the parole board to decide whether or not you get to go free. And it is based again upon your good behavior and the marks that you've received, or the good points and score that you have received. The third type of release is just expiration. You have served 100% of your sentence. There is no post-prison supervision. You've just finished and you're off paper, you're done, and you get to go free. Parole, the word parole comes from the French, parole d'honneur. I don't speak French, so I didn't say it in the proper French accent. You know, maybe it's, oui, parole d'honneur, I don't know. But the parole d'honneur in the French has a meaning, or what it means is word of honor. And the idea is that if we let you go free, do you promise to behave and to follow the law and not to commit any additional crimes? So you're on your word of honor that you will be a model citizen and you will not cause any more mischief amongst the community and the society, and they'll let you out of prison. The French prefer the term conditional liberation. They're going to set you free, give you liberty based on conditions, and you have to meet all of this criteria. The first time that we see parole is in 1791. The French published a report based on the concept of rehabilitation and reformation that rewards were given under the mark system. You score a certain amount of points, you gain enough marks, and you're set free and you're let go. The actual credit for putting parole into practice around the world comes from three specific men. This is Manuel Montesinos from Spain, George Michael Oversar in Germany, and Alexander McConaughey from England. Actually, McConaughey went to not England, but Australia, and he had a prison that was off the coast of Australia, and he did away with corporal punishment. He did away with the floggings and the whipping. He did away with the chain gangs. He did away with the great big humongous metal ball, the ball and chain that was tied to people's ankles so that they couldn't escape. And as these 1,000 or so convicts, the most incorrigible convicts from England, were sent to Australia, and as they reformed, McConaughey sent them to the mainland of Australia, and they built Sydney, and they built the other cities in Australia. And the people that the European colonists that founded Australia were actually criminals that were released from McConaughey's prison. The mark system that was proposed by McConaughey started in 1837, and the prisoners, their duration of their sentence would be decreased based upon good behavior, based upon their work ethic. They'd go get a job, they'd prove themselves worthy, they would get time off. And as the inmates showed these good behaviors, they got more points, they were given more freedoms. McConaughey had set up a program on a leave pass system to where, you know, once you got to a certain level, he'd let you have 3-day passes, and he'd let you go to Australia for a week or two or a month, until eventually he just said, okay, you're free, don't come back. And then they helped establish the European colony on Australia. Sir Walter Crofton started the Irish system. And the Irish system is what we see and is still in practice today. Has 3 levels. There's strict imprisonment, there's an indeterminate sentence, and then there's a ticket of leave. A strict imprisonment, find yourself locked down 23 hours a day. You get an hour for rec and shower and whatever else, but you stay in your prison cell 23 hours a day. The indeterminate sentencing is something that we found from the pre-1970s, to where you went to prison, but you didn't have to stay there for the rest of your life. If you took education programs and you took counseling programs and rehabilitation programs, and as you completed these programs, you would receive points, and you were given additional freedoms within the prison. Okay. The ticket of leave was a ticket, said here's your pass. Again, like I mentioned in Australia, this would lead to parole and to discretionary release. Classification was determined by the seriousness of the crime that you committed, and then the marks that you had collected and earned as a reward for good behavior and good conduct. The first parole in the United States was at the Elmira prison in New York. It started in 1876. The federal government adopted parole in 1910, and as a couple of you have already mentioned, in 1984 the federal government did away with federal parole, and they just went to a mandatory release program to where you were under supervision of the probation department. There were 4 rationales to have parole in the United States. The first was a reduction in the length of incarcerations. We could let you out of prison earlier. We had an overcrowding issue going on in the prisons, and we've always had an overcrowding issue in the prisons. But what we found with a reason and justification for parole is because of the overcrowding, we could shorten prison sentences, we could let people out of prison, and we could supervise them in the community. And as long as they didn't commit additional crimes and they didn't cause any problems and they met all of the requirements that they had, they were allowed to go free. Second was the supervision of the parolee. The supervision of the parolee in the beginnings was voluntary. Volunteers, just like in probation, when probation started, people would stand up and say, hey, I will take responsibility for this individual. I'll make sure that they have a place to live. I'll make sure that they get a job. I'll make sure that they become a productive member of society. And if there was any issues or any problems, the supervisor, the person that was supervising the parolee, could call the prison, and they would come pick him up and bring him back to prison. The third was the imposition of indeterminate sentencing, because people were being sentenced to prison from 2 to 12 or 5 to 20 or 15 to life. You know, these sentences opened up an ability to let people go free early, and it allowed them to be supervised in the world. The fourth was a reduction in the rising costs of incarceration. Keeping inmates in prison is expensive. And we covered this in the last video lecture when we were talking about the cost differences of keeping people in prison and letting them go and be placed on probation. The same rules still apply to parole. It is a lot cheaper to keep somebody on parole than it is to keep them in prison. So that was the fourth justification for allowing parole in the United States. Again, the federal government has stopped parole. The states still have some form of parole. In the 19 from 1930 to 1960, we saw a rise in the medical model. And what the medical model said was that people were committing crimes not because they were bad people or because they were evil people. They were committing crimes because they didn't know any better. They had a mental ailment. They had a mental illness. They had a physical ailment. And there was something on the outside influencing them to commit crime. So if we treated that, and we treated that information and those ailments and those sicknesses and those illnesses, we could treat them and then release them and let them go back into the population, and they would theoretically not commit any additional crime. Okay. In the 1970s, we started to see a shift from the medical model to the justice model, or also what's known as the just desserts model. That based upon the severity of your crime, you're going to do your time. We're not interested in saving you. We're not interested in remodeling or rehabilitating you. We're just going to punish you. And if you want to change your life, that's all up to you. Okay. So the discussion this week is the pros and cons of discretionary parole and mandatory release. What I want you to do is talk about the pros and the cons of both of these programs, mandatory release and discretionary parole, why they're good, why they're bad, and I want you to support that with outside sources, with the literature outside of the text. Go to the database, find articles about the subject, and give us your pros and cons. Don't forget to cite it in APA format. Okay, your case study for this week is found on page 56, and what it is you are the parole officer, and you're going to make a decision about releasing two individuals. You're going to release Tony, who is terminally ill. He's in prison for murder. They're going to give you his case study. They're going to tell you about his terminal illness, and you're going to make a decision on what to do, and you must justify that. The second case is William. He's an elderly man in prison. He's in prison for motor vehicle theft and reckless endangerment, and he has other problems, and it gives you his background. You are to make a decision on whether or not you're going to release these two people from prison, and you are going to back your decisions up based upon the information in the text and outside sources, and you don't forget to cite your sources. Upload your Word document, and you can find your assignments and the discussions in the folders below. I do want to thank you very much for joining us today in Criminal Justice in a Nutshell, History of Parole, Mandatory Release. Have a good day.